Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to really getting complex topics without all the noise. Today, we're diving deep, really deep, into a fascinating thinker, Ali Izetbegović, and his powerful critique of Western civilization. We're going to explore how his unique life story shaped this perspective, a perspective that honestly feels incredibly relevant right now.
Absolutely. Izetbegović is such an interesting figure. Think about it, a Bosnian Muslim, but also European. A scholar, philosopher, writer, even an artist. He was steeped in Islamic tradition, yes, but also deeply engaged with Western thought. And this gave him a really unique vantage point to critique Western culture. It wasn't just abstract either. He knew the details, like crime statistics in the U.S., suicide rates in developed nations. Quite specific.
That combination is quite rare, isn't it? Someone with that breadth of experience and, well, sheer intellect. So the big question for us today is, how did this person with such a mixed background arrive at proposing Islam as a kind of holistic answer to our spiritual struggles?
Well, fundamentally, he saw Islam as a complete path. That's the key. It integrates the spiritual side, think worship, finding inner peace with the material side, the practical laws and Islamic jurisprudence that govern everyday transactions in society. He contrasted this sharply with, say, Christianity, which he viewed as more purely spiritual, and Western civilization, which he saw as overwhelmingly material. For Izetbegović, Islam's goal was unique: to foster a human being who is coherent, integrated in both spirit and body. And society's laws and institutions should support that.
Okay, that's a really potent starting point for his critique. But before we dive into the arguments themselves, let's unpack the man. Who was Ali Izetbegović? What shaped him?
His life was, well, extraordinary, forged in really intense circumstances. He was born back in 1925 in Krupa, Bosnia-Herzegovina, part of Yugoslavia then, came from a notable Muslim family, studied law in Sarajevo. But he wasn't just a lawyer. He became this deep scholar, not just of Islamic law, but contemporary culture, too. And at the same time, a resistance fighter, a political leader. It's rare to see that combination, right? A thinker and a doer. He led Bosnia-Herzegovina to independence, served as president, even commanded troops against Serbian forces. He lived his ideas.
Oh, and faced serious consequences for his beliefs early on.
Oh, absolutely. He paid a heavy price. Imprisoned twice by the Yugoslav regime. First in 1949, 5 years hard labor. That was for involvement with the Muslim youth group, which was really more charitable and educational, not political, but still. Then again in 1983. Arrested for defending the rights of Bosnian Muslims, sentenced to 14 years, ended up serving 8.
From prisoner to president, essentially. He founded the Party of Democratic Action in '89, head in '90, then president.
Exactly. And from that position, he had to lead his people through that horrific war for independence. The Serbs launched what was essentially a war of extermination against Bosnian Muslims in 1992. The resilience was incredible. And Izetbegović fought hard on the diplomatic front, too, getting Bosnia-Herzegovina recognized internationally as an independent UN member, like Slovenia and Croatia had done.
And after all that, a decade as president, he stepped down voluntarily in 2000 because of his health. His death in 2003, marked by the largest funeral in Bosnian history. It just speaks volumes about his impact.
It really does.
Yeah.
And his writings live on. Escape to Freedom, written in prison, Obstacles to Islamic Revival, the Islamic Declaration, and the big one for our discussion, Islam Between East and West. That's where you find his most thorough critique of Western culture.
Okay, so we have this picture now. A scholar, a leader, shaped by conflict and imprisonment. This brings us right to the core of his thinking. His critique isn't just tearing down civilization. He called it a need to humanize civilization. So what were his main issues with Western civilization, which he saw as, well, dominant everywhere?
He really starts at the most basic point possible, the question, what is man? And he argues that Western civilization, whether it's capitalist or socialist, fundamentally answers this question with the idea of natural man, meaning a purely material being. Any other dimension, spiritual or otherwise, is essentially denied or ignored.
So a biological machine, almost.
Pretty much. He saw this as heavily influenced by Darwinian thinking, viewing humans as just the end point of evolution from lower life forms. And for Izetbegović, this blurs a critical line. It defines us by external things walking upright, language, tools, making us just the perfect animal. Different in degree from other animals, maybe, but not fundamentally different in kind.
And that connects to ideas like Nietzsche's Superman, right?
Mm-hmm.
He saw that as the logical conclusion, this sort of optimal animal without any real inner life.
Precisely. No soul, no tragedy, no personality in the deep sense, no heart. Just a highly evolved physical and intellectual being. And for him, that materialist definition just falls completely flat when you try to explain things like religion, ethics, art, philosophy. They don't fit. They just don't.
Yeah. That does raise a huge question. If we're just animals, maybe more complex ones, but still animals, what explains that leap? Why did humans start seeking the sacred, sometimes even going against nature? Why wasn't survival enough?
Right. And this is where he introduces a really intriguing idea, metaphysical dizziness. He described it as this unknown, non-material kind of origin event, a turning point that separated humans from just being matter. This dizziness, he thought, is what made us rational beings with imagination, emotion, sensing this need to connect with another reality, another world. And that's why you see worship, symbols, taboos, beliefs emerging everywhere humans are found. It explains that drive beyond the material.
It's a powerful counter-narrative.
And he builds on it with what he called the primitive man complex. He looked at the universal phenomenon of sacrifice. You find it in basically all religions, going way back to the Stone Age, often sacrificing the best, the young, treated with reverence.
Which, from a purely materialist, self-interest perspective, makes absolutely no sense. Why sacrifice your best?
Exactly. It defies that logic. For Izetbegović, it points directly to something deeper, something non-material in us. It shows we're not just savage animals driven by instinct. He'd say, look, humans do these incomprehensible things like sacrifice, driven by suffering, maybe delusion sometimes, but it's part of the human tragedy. If we were just the best animals, life would be simpler, wouldn't it? None of these moral struggles, these existential knots we tie ourselves in.
Okay, so given all that, what did he conclude about religion's actual role in human life?
Well, he argued Darwinism fundamentally can't explain religion because it starts by assuming human-animal unity. It erases the line between nature and culture. Religion, he said, reestablishes that line. It's almost like the rule is, see what the animal does and do the opposite. Things like art, ethics, philosophy, our fear of death, conscience, sacrifice. These aren't just evolutionary byproducts for him. They represent an inner life that doesn't evolve in the same way, and it's what makes us distinctly human. You don't see chimps building altars or writing ethical codes, right? But wherever you find humans, you find religion and art usually tangled together.
Well, what about the counter-argument? That maybe it is all just random chance, that existence just happened.
He had very little patience for that idea, honestly. He found the theory of chance existence without cause or design irrational and just lacking any real proof. He kind of scoffed at the inconsistency. You know, materialists find two stones stacked purposefully and say, human did that. But then they look at something infinitely more complex, like a human skull, and attribute that to pure chance. It didn't add up for him. He felt life is ultimately a miracle, a phenomenon that science alone can't fully capture. Awe, he said, is the highest form of understanding it.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. How does this materialist view grapple with ethics? That seems like a major challenge.
A huge one in his view. He argued that materialist evolution simply has no basis for ethics. For Izetbegović, ethical behavior either has no real meaning or it inherently points towards God and immortality. There's no middle ground. You can't build a solid ethical framework without religion, he asserted, because ethics are essentially religion translated into rules for how we should live. Think about it. Darwinian man is part of nature's struggle. Survival of the fittest. The strongest wins, not necessarily the best in an ethical sense. Biological progress doesn't automatically make us better people, morally speaking. And he saw Nietzsche as taking that biological logic and applying it directly to society, which, in his reading, led to rejecting compassion, justifying violence.
What about secular ethics, though? People trying to build ethics without religion?
He acknowledged that, but he felt that even when secular systems try to be independent, they often end up borrowing, maybe unconsciously, from religious principles. He'd point to Christian ethics as a prime example of how religion and profound ethics are linked. Or Renaissance art, great art, aligned with religion and ethics. His warning was stark. Without a transcendent basis for ethics, what happens? Pleasure becomes good, pain becomes bad, and my own material gain becomes the highest goal.
And art. Where does art fit into this picture for him? What does it tell us?
Art was another powerful piece of evidence for him, showing our dual nature, spiritual and material, that materialism just can't explain. He saw a fundamental conflict between science and art on human origins. Science depicts this gradual evolution. But art, Greek tragedies, Dante, African spirituals, ancient frescoes, art consistently presents humans as emerging from some unknown spiritual realm, not related to Darwin's man. A person, he'd say, like a great painting or a mosque or a poem, is more than just the physical materials. It's spirit. For him, religion and art weren't separate categories. They were different expressions of the same deep human inspiration, fundamentally unified. He even argued that so-called atheist artists are deep down searching for God because true art in its essence can't be non-religious.
Okay, so he builds this comprehensive case that Western thought struggles with these core human experiences, spirit, ethics, art. Where then did he pinpoint the central crisis of Western civilization itself?
He made a really critical distinction, one that's often missed, between civilization and culture. Civilization for him was the external stuff. Technology, infrastructure, economics, science. Basically an extension of our animal life, managing our material exchange with nature. Culture, though, was the internal. Religion, art, ethics, philosophy. The things that spring from the human soul. Dealing with the mystery of being human.
And the crisis is?
The crisis, he argued forcefully, is the West's overwhelming preference for civilization over culture, for the material over the spiritual, the unspoken motto being something like, produce to earn to spend, and keep creating new desires. Forever. This relentless material focus, he believed, damages us. Look at education, he'd say. It's all technical and intellectual development, facts, how to think analytically. But where's the character building, the integrity? How to be a whole person, culturally, spiritually, it's missing. Western education, he concluded, is mostly designed to control the external world, not to cultivate the inner human being.
And he was pretty blunt about it, saying powerful nations like the U.S. or the old Soviet Union might lead in civilization but lag in culture. He saw education becoming just functional, serving industry or bureaucracy, creating cogs in the machine, not free individuals. Supporting civilization, yes, but degrading culture.
Exactly. And another symptom he pointed to was mass culture. He was careful to distinguish this from real culture. True culture focuses on the individual spirit. Mass culture targets the mass man, the anonymous audience. Its only goal is to satisfy appetites, immediate needs. It actually works against authentic culture, he argued, by sort of pouring souls into identical molds. It standardizes us, reduces freedom. He contrasted it with genuine folk culture, think traditional music or crafts, which is usually participatory, direct, authentic, not vulgar. Performer and audience are often the same. Mass culture, though, is based on manipulation. Producers create, millions consume passively. Think about just watching TV. You have almost no influence on what's being shown.
So the very tools of civilization technology, when used for mass culture, become tools of spiritual control almost, creating this mass culture human who's maybe childish, wants vulgar entertainment, lacks real humor, craves extreme sensations.
But that was precisely his fear, a kind of spiritual servitude. And this all feeds into the next symptom, profound spiritual emptiness. Despite all the material progress, the huge cities, the factories people are suffering, he saw industrial work often dehumanizing people, cutting them off from religion, from art, leading to a kind of intellectual poverty. And he backed this up with those stark statistics we mentioned earlier, the shocking rise in suicide, crime, violence, fear, mental illness, especially in the most technologically advanced societies. He noted how things like alcohol, drugs, pornography, once maybe seen as escapes for the poor, became common among the affluent too. Why? Repression, maybe, a rigid life. Sleep, train, work, a spiritual vacuum.
It is a striking paradox, isn't it? That sense of despair often seems strongest in places with the highest living standards, like Scandinavia. High literacy, social safety nets, comfort, yet existential angst. Izetbegović saw the failure of science, power, wealth to bring happiness as demanding a total rethink, starting with that flawed view of what a human being even is.
Yes, and that led to his critique of the functional society. He argued Western civilization, both Marxist and capitalist versions, had turned humans from ethical beings into merely functional ones. Life gets reduced to production, consumption, distribution. That's it. This strips away freedom, choice, individuality. You end up with a kind of utopia that's more like a beehive or an anthill, everyone functioning within a system but without genuine selfhood. He drew a sharp line between community and society. Community is built on shared spirit, trust, brotherhood. Society, on the other hand, often operates on survival of the fittest, exploitation, or maybe just shared material interests at best. Society gives you material benefits, helps you survive. But only community, he stressed, truly understands justice, mutual aid, solidarity, real brotherhood.
Okay, so he paints this picture of a deep crisis in the West, stemming from this fundamentally one-sided materialist view of humanity. What then did he propose as the path forward, the optimal solution for human happiness?
Well, he saw Islam, along with Judaism and Christianity, as central to human history, defining what it means to be human, both inwardly and outwardly. But he viewed them differently. Judaism, in his analysis, was more focused on an earthly paradise, concerned with this world's progress, national interests, maybe less emphasis on the afterlife or deep spirituality compared to worldly matters. He observed, for instance, that Jewish contributions were often immense in civilization science, economics perhaps less so in culture, as he defined it, spiritual depth. Christianity he saw as almost the polar opposite, focused intensely on the inner soul, the kingdom not of this world. You know, the idea you can't serve two masters, heaven and earth.
So one focused on earth, one on heaven.
And Islam, for him, was the synthesis, the integration. It blends the inner spiritual life with outer reality, asceticism and reason, contemplation and action. It began, he noted, as a spiritual movement, but naturally grew into a state, a social order. He said Islam is like a human being itself. It has that divine spark, but also deals with practical, everyday realities. It's realistic, not just romantic ideals. And he felt you couldn't truly grasp Islam just by reading. It needed to be lived, applied.
What's really fascinating is how he saw Islam balancing the individual and the community. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, that's crucial. He didn't see the Islamic community, the Ummah, as just an ethnic group. It's a religious community with an ethical mission. Enjoin good, forbid evil. That transcends other loyalties. Islam starts with the individual. Yes, your relationship with yourself, with God. Finding internal consistency, aligning your ideals with your desires and actions. But this is key, puts huge importance on the social dimension. He pointed out how much of the Quran addresses the community, the you plural, not just the individual you. His perspective was that we're only truly, purely individual, perhaps in a spiritual sense, before God. Here on earth, we are inherently social beings. Our individuality develops within a community context. He felt that some interpretations of Christianity, by perhaps overemphasizing the individual over the social, could lead to a disconnect, frustration between ideals and reality. Islam, he argued, aims for full integration, a fusion between the individual and society, humanity and community, building a culture and a civilization that marries the spiritual focus of religion with the practical focus of civilization.
Could you give us some concrete examples from Islamic practice that show this integration, this duality he talks about?
Absolutely. The 5 pillars are perfect examples, according to him. Take prayer, salah. It's obviously a deep spiritual connection with God, but it's also intensely physical ablution, bowing, prostrating. It's embodied. It's not just sitting and meditating. It's a practical act involving your whole being. And it has a huge social element, the communal prayers, especially the Friday prayer, which he even called a civic political prayer with a broader message, or zakat, the obligatory charity. He saw its institution as a pivotal moment when the early spiritual community became a state. It's a legal duty, essentially the first state tax in history, he argued, and it was fundamental in shaping the political society in Medina. Even the Shahada, the declaration of faith, the most personal act, converting. But in Islam, it requires witnesses. That simple requirement transforms it from a purely inner decision into an act with legal and social weight. You're joining a community, taking on obligations. It's not just between you and God in silence. So again and again, he finds this core principle, Islam constantly addressing the human being as this dual entity, inner spirit, outer reality, and seeking harmony between them. So what you really see with Ali Izetbegović is someone who used his incredible knowledge, spanning both Islamic and Western thought, to offer this deep, almost deconstructive critique of Western materialism. He concluded that Western civilization, really in both its main forms, capitalist and Marxist, just operates from a fundamentally incomplete, purely material view of what it means to be human.
Right. And he didn't just criticize, he clarified why. That key distinction he made between culture, arising from the spirit, and civilization, the external material stuff. His argument was powerful, that the West's obsession with civilizational progress, often at the expense of culture and spiritual side, has created this deep spiritual void, even amidst plenty.
Exactly. And if you follow that logic, if you deny the spiritual basis, then inevitably things like art, genuine culture, religion, even ethics, which he saw as flowing from that inner spirit, they get diminished, negated eventually.
Which brings us back to his proposed alternative. By presenting Islam as this path that integrates both the spiritual and material, he offered something different. Different from a purely spiritual focus, like he saw in some aspects of Christianity, and vastly different from the purely material focus he diagnosed in Western civilization. His vision was for this balanced human being, acknowledging both our spiritual core and our material needs, seeking harmony within ourselves and between us and our community, through principles like those in the pillars. So maybe the final thought for you listening is this. If a civilization struggles to meet those fundamental human needs for meaning and spiritual connection, leading to all these social issues, as Izetbegović pointed out, what does that really tell us about how we measure progress? And maybe more personally, how do we, in our own lives, navigate finding that balance in a world that often seems to pull us so hard towards the material, sometimes forgetting the spirit?